The morning my father called me a burden to the family, I was sitting in my corner office on the 14th floor of a building I partially owned. I had a coffee in one hand, a financial report in the other, and a $50,000 tuition invoice open on my second screen. An invoice with my name on it for children I did not have, did not raise, and had never once been asked if I wanted to help pay for. I remember reading it twice, not because I was confused, but because I needed my brain to catch up with my eyes. $50,000 per year, per child. 3 children. You do that math in your head and you arrive at a number that makes your chest tighten, even if the money isn't yours. Except in this case, apparently, according to my father, it was mine, or it was supposed to be. For my sister Deborah's 3 kids, kids who called me Aunt Rachel maybe 4 times a year, usually right before Christmas, usually right before someone needed something. Kids I loved genuinely, but who existed in my life the way a beautiful painting exists in someone else's house. You can appreciate it, you can admire it, but it is not yours to maintain. I set my coffee down. I leaned back in my chair, and I thought about something my grandmother used to say when I was little, on Sunday afternoons when the house was warm and something was always cooking, and the world felt manageable. She used to say, "Rachel, baby, the people who call you selfish the loudest are usually the ones who've been living off your generosity the longest." I was maybe 9 years old the first time she said that to me. I didn't fully understand it then. I do now. Grandma Dorothy was a wise woman, and in about 90 seconds, I was going to find out just how right she was, because my father was calling, and he was not happy. Pause, let it breathe. My name is Rachel Simmons. I am 39 years old. I am childless, by choice, by design, and without a single regret. I am a senior financial strategist at a firm in Chicago. I own 2 properties. I have a retirement fund that would make some people's eyes water and make other people ask uncomfortable questions at family dinners. And on a Tuesday morning in October, I became the villain of my family's story, or so they thought. Villains, in my experience, are just heroes whose side of the story nobody bothered to tell. I'm going to tell mine. Before I do, I need you to do something for me right now. If you have ever been told that your success belongs to someone else because you don't have real responsibilities, if you have ever been treated like your childlessness, your singleness, your different life choices made you a family piggy bank, drop a comment right now and say, "I see you," because this one is for you. And if you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the stories on this channel, we don't do halfway, we don't do surface level. We go all the way in, every single time. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, the real beginning. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio, middle class, functional, the kind of family that looked perfectly normal from the outside and was absolutely quietly exhausting from the inside. My father, Gerald Simmons, was a postal supervisor for 31 years, steady job, steady income. He wore the same style of bootcut jeans for 20 years and called it a personal brand before personal brands were a thing. He was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that from the start, because this story is complicated, and the people in it are complicated, and I have never believed that doing something harmful makes you a monster, it just makes you human. But my father had a worldview, and his worldview had a hierarchy. At the top, family loyalty, the idea that family comes first, always, no matter what, full stop. Right underneath that, woven into it so tightly you could barely see the seam, the idea that certain people in a family are meant to give and certain people are meant to receive, that those roles are assigned early and rarely renegotiated. He never articulated this philosophy. He would have denied it if you had accused him of it, but I learned it early, and I learned it the way children always learn the truest things about their families, not from what was said, but from what was done. My sister, Deborah, was 4 years older than me. Deborah was, and I say this with all the complicated, tangled, bittersweet love a younger sister can muster, my father's favorite. Not in a small, barely perceptible way, in a visible, undeniable, everyone in the room can see kind of way. Deborah was beautiful. She had my mother's cheekbones and our father's eyes, and a smile that made strangers feel like old friends. She was magnetic. She was warm. She had a laugh that made you feel like you were the funniest, most interesting person alive. And Deborah, from the time she was old enough to understand that charm was a currency, spent it freely and never saved a dime. I was different. I was the one in the corner with a book, the one who wanted to understand how things worked, not just what things were, but why. I was the kid who, at 12 years old, read a library book about compound interest and came home and made a spreadsheet, on paper because we didn't have a computer yet. My father looked at that spreadsheet and said, "That's nice, Rachel," the same way he might comment on a decent painting. When Deborah, that same year, won a small-town beauty pageant, he framed the photo and put it in the living room. I'm not saying this to be bitter. I am genuinely not. I made peace with that dynamic a long time ago. I'm saying it because it is context. It is the soil that everything else grew in. My mother, Sandra Simmons, God bless her, was the buffer. She was the one who came to my school plays, who helped me with my college applications, who said, "I'm proud of you," without needing a reason. My mother was the quiet heart of that house. She didn't have a loud presence, but she had a steady one, and I leaned on it more than she probably knew. Deborah married at 23. Her name was Troy Keller. Troy was handsome, funny, effortlessly likable, and spectacularly bad with money, a combination that is both more common and more dangerous than people give it credit. Troy worked in sales. He had a genuine gift for it. People liked him. He could sell you something and make you feel like you'd done him a favor by buying it. The problem was that his personal finances reflected the confidence of a man who always assumed the next deal was coming, which meant the current bills were someone else's future problem. They bought a house they couldn't comfortably afford in a suburb that matched the lifestyle they wanted, not the income they had. And then they had children. Mason came first, then Lily 18 months later, then Connor 2 years after that. 3 children in 4 years. I adored those kids from the moment they existed. Mason was serious and thoughtful, like me, in ways that made Deborah quietly uncomfortable. Lily was artistic and loud and demanded attention the way only a middle child can. Connor was the baby, easygoing, already the family mascot at age 4. I loved them. I want that to be absolutely clear. Everything I'm about to tell you happened against a backdrop of genuine love for those 3 children. But love for children does not mean unlimited financial obligation to their parents. That is a line that I had to learn to hold, and it took me longer than it should have. I moved to Chicago at 24 after I finished my graduate degree. I had a job offer at a mid-size financial consulting firm, a studio apartment that smelled like old carpet and ambition, and exactly $11,000 in savings that I treated like it was made of glass. I was careful with money the way someone is careful about a thing they know can disappear, because I had watched it disappear growing up. Not catastrophically, we were never in danger, not really, but there was always a tightness, always a month where the math got tricky, and I had decided very early that I was not going to live that way. So I built. Slowly, carefully, year by year, I built. I got promoted, I moved to a better firm, I took on more responsibility, worked more hours, and poured every raise back into my savings and investments instead of into a bigger apartment or nicer clothes. I drove the same car for 8 years. I cooked most of my meals. I said no to a lot of things that my peers said yes to. And it worked. Gradually, quietly, it worked. Meanwhile, back in Columbus, Deborah and Troy's life continued to expand in every direction except financial stability. The first time I helped was 26. Deborah called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember it was Wednesday because I had a big client presentation the next morning and I was nervous. And she said they were 3 weeks behind on the car payment, and if they didn't pay by Friday, the car was going to be repossessed. "How much?" I asked. $1,100, she said. I know it's a lot, but Troy's commission check is coming in next week, I swear. We just need a bridge. I sent the money that night. Troy's commission check came in the following week, as promised. Nobody ever offered to pay me back. I didn't ask. I told myself, it's family. That's what you do. When I was 28, my father called and said the roof on the family home needed repairs, and the estimate had come in at $8,000, and he was $3,000 short. I sent $3,000. When I was 30, Mason needed braces. Deborah's insurance only covered a portion. I covered the rest, about $2,000. When I was 31, Troy's car broke down and they needed a replacement. I co-signed on a car loan because Troy's credit was not in a position to do it alone. I told myself it was fine. The payments would come out of his account, not mine. For 14 months, the payments came out of his account. For the remaining 8 months of that loan, they came out of mine. I paid it. I didn't fight about it. I absorbed it. When I was 33, Deborah called and said Connor had been diagnosed with a sensory processing issue, and there was a specialist, a really good one, who could help, but they were out of network, and the out-of-pocket cost for the initial assessment and first round of sessions was going to be close to $4,000. I sent $4,000 before she finished the sentence. Because Connor was 3 years old and he needed help, and I had the money, and that felt in that moment like the clearest possible decision in the world. A pause. Something shifts in the voice. I'm listing these things not to perform generosity, not to stand at this microphone and say, look at everything I gave. I'm listing them because I need you to understand something about how this kind of dynamic builds. It builds slowly. Each individual act feels reasonable, each individual amount feels manageable, and each individual act of generosity is received with warmth, with gratitude, at least in the beginning, and that warmth feels like the return on investment. It feels like love flowing back. But somewhere between 26 and 35, the warmth started to thin. The thank yous became shorter, the check-ins between asks became less frequent, and the asks themselves changed in character. They stopped saying, I know this is a lot to ask. They started saying, we're going to need some help this month. My father stopped saying, only if you can manage it, Rachel. He started saying, this is what families do. And I, because I was the reliable one, because I was the serious one, because I had built something and they needed it, kept saying yes. By the time I was 35, I had given, conservatively, somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 to my family over the course of a decade. Not loans, gifts, money I never expected to see again and never asked for. I had never once sat at the Thanksgiving table and brought it up. I had never once sent an itemized list. I had never once made anyone feel small or ashamed for needing help. I gave quietly, and I gave consistently, and I kept building my own life in the margins of what was left. And then, one day, the ask got so large, so breathtaking in its size and its entitlement, that the word yes simply would not come out of my mouth. Voice tightens, controlled, precise. It was a Sunday evening in March. I had just finished a client call that had run long, and I was tired in that particular way that comes after you have been fully, professionally, on for 3 hours, and suddenly the performance is over, and the quiet hits you. I was still at my desk. I had a glass of water. I was thinking about what to make for dinner. My phone rang. Dad. I picked up smiling. He did not sound like he was calling to chat. Rachel. That's how he opened it. Not, hey, sweetheart, not, how are you, baby girl, not even a, how was your week? Just, Rachel, flat, deliberate, like the opening of a formal proceeding. Hey, Dad, what's going on? I need to talk to you about Mason, Lily, and Connor's school situation. Something in my stomach shifted slightly. Not alarm, not yet, just a kind of internal stillness, the body's way of paying attention. Okay, I said, what's going on with the school? And then he told me. The children had been enrolled at Westbrook Academy for the past 2 years. If you're not familiar, Westbrook Academy is a private school in one of Columbus's more affluent suburbs. It is the kind of institution that has been producing a certain kind of graduate for over 60 years. Small class sizes, college prep curriculum starting in middle school, an arts program that's legitimately excellent, a sports program that competes well regionally, and a campus that looks like somebody's idea of what a New England boarding school should feel like, except in Ohio. It is also, and I cannot stress this enough, $50,000 a year. Per child. Now, the obvious question is, how were Deborah and Troy paying for it? The answer, which I was about to learn for the first time on that Sunday call, was they weren't. Not entirely. Not even mostly. Westbrook Academy had a scholarship and tuition assistance program for families demonstrating financial need. Deborah and Troy had applied 2 years earlier, when Troy was between jobs and their income genuinely was reduced, and they had been granted partial tuition assistance, enough to make the school accessible, though still a stretch. That assistance, I was now being told, was expiring, and Troy, who had not found steady work since losing his previous position, had been without full-time income for 4 months. 4 months during which, I was apparently the last to know, the family had been in quiet crisis. They need continuity, my father said. Pulling those kids out mid-year would be traumatic. You understand that. Dad, I made my voice careful, level, the way you hold a full glass when you're walking. How much are we talking about? For the rest of the school year, probably about $50,000. The room didn't go quiet. I went quiet. There's a difference. The room just sat there, indifferent. It was me who stopped making noise inside my own head for a moment. $50,000, I said. Not a question, just the number, out loud, taking up air. You don't have kids, Rachel. And there it was, the sentence, the thesis statement, the entire philosophical architecture of what followed, compressed into 8 words. You have no one depending on you. You make good money. You don't have the same expenses the rest of us have. I took one slow breath. Dad, I have a mortgage. I have 2 investment properties I'm managing. I'm building toward my own retirement. I have financial goals that are going to require that money. You have discretionary income, he cut me off. Clean, certain, like he'd already rehearsed this part. Deborah doesn't, those children don't, and this family takes care of each other. And there it was. This family takes care of each other. As though I hadn't been doing exactly that for a decade, as though the $80,000+ I had sent home over the years was invisible, as though my care only counted when it was inconvenient enough to prove something. I said, I'll think about it. He said, don't think too long. The payment deadline is in 2 weeks. And he hung up. A long beat. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that. Not crying, not spiraling, not calling a friend in a panic, just sitting. The way you sit when you need the quiet to tell you something true. Because here's the thing about being a financial strategist. Your whole professional life is about reading situations clearly, stripping away the noise, identifying what's actually happening underneath what appears to be happening. And what was actually happening was this. My family had made a decision, a significant, expensive, life-affecting decision, without me. They had enrolled 3 children in a school that cost $150,000 a year, with a funding structure that was always going to collapse, and when it collapsed, they sat down together in a group chat I wasn't in, having conversations I wasn't part of, and decided that I was the solution. Not because they had asked me, not because I had offered, but because I was single, childless, and financially stable, and in their accounting, that meant my money had no rightful owner. I was not a person with a financial life and a set of goals and a carefully constructed future. I was a resource. Quietly. And the worst part, the part that sat with me the longest that night, was that I had taught them to see me that way. Because every time I said yes without being asked, every time I sent money without a conversation, every time I absorbed the cost of someone else's choices and never once said, "Wait, hold on, let me think about this." I was writing them a lesson, and the lesson was, Rachel will handle it. That night, for the first time, I considered not handling it. But more than that, for the first time, I considered doing something entirely different. Okay, I need to stop right here for just a second, because if you are listening to this and you recognize this pattern, the giving that becomes expected, the reliability that becomes exploitation, the love that gets weaponized against you, I want you to know you are not imagining it, you are not oversensitive, and you are not a bad person for wanting to protect what you built. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, share it right now. Text it to someone, post it somewhere, because there is somebody in your life who needs to hear that they are allowed to say no, and maybe that somebody is you. And if you've been here with me this whole time and you're not subscribed yet, please fix that right now. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back every week, because we are just getting started. All right, back to it, because things are about to get very interesting. The week after my father's call, I did not call Deborah. I did not call Dad back. I did not log into my bank and start calculating what I could move around. What I did was research. I'm a financial strategist. When the rest of my life is noisy, research is where I go quiet. It's where I'm most myself, sitting with data, pulling threads, asking, what's actually here? I started with Westbrook Academy. It took me about 40 minutes of online research and 2 carefully placed phone calls to build a basic picture of the institution. Westbrook had a long history in Central Ohio, founded in the 1950s, respected academic reputation, strong endowment relative to its size, active alumni network, solid school, genuinely good educational outcomes. But like a lot of legacy private schools that had coasted for decades on reputation and tradition, Westbrook had hit some turbulence in recent years. Enrollment had dipped in the years following the pandemic. Some families had rediscovered public school options. Others had moved to newer private institutions with more modern facilities. The campus, while beautiful, was aging in ways that required capital. The board was navigating some internal tension about the school's direction. And then I found something that made me sit up a little straighter. Westbrook Academy didn't own its campus. The building, the grounds, the manicured lawns, the pottery studio, the whole picture-perfect package, none of it was owned by the school. It all sat on land owned by a holding company called Crane Hill Properties, LLC. Now, Crane Hill was not a flashy outfit. They didn't have a website with photos and mission statements. They were a quiet, private, Central Ohio real estate holding company that owned a portfolio of commercial and institutional properties, schools, office buildings, a couple of medical facilities. The kind of company that just exists in the background of other things, the way most important infrastructure does. But Crane Hill filed paperwork. And paperwork, if you know where to look and you know what you're reading, tells you almost everything you need to know about a business. I dug deeper. What I found was this. Crane Hill Properties was majority owned by 2 founding partners who had built the company together over 30 years. One had retired several years earlier and had divested most of his stake. The other, a man named Douglas Farrell, age 71, still held controlling interest and still technically ran the company, but the signals in the filings were unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. Douglas Farrell was looking for an exit. Not urgently, not in a fire sale, everything must go way, but methodically, quietly, the way a man in his 70s who has worked his whole life looks at the next chapter and starts thinking about simplification. There had been some quiet feelers put into the market over the past 18 months, a few informal conversations with potential buyers, nothing formalized. The campus, while beautiful, was aging in ways that required capital. The board was navigating some internal tension about the school's direction. And then I leaned back in my chair and I let myself sit with a thought I hadn't fully allowed yet. What if I didn't just say no? What if I said something completely differently, permanently different? I called my attorney. Her name is Carolyn Webb. She's been my attorney for 6 years, and she is one of the sharpest, most unflappable women I have ever met in my professional life. She once sat across from a table of 6 men who were trying to renegotiate a contract at the last minute, and she just waited them out, never raised her voice, never blinked. They gave her everything she asked for. I told Carolyn what I was thinking. She was quiet for longer than Carolyn is usually quiet. Then she said, "Rachel, that is either absolutely brilliant or completely insane." I said, "Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." She laughed, a real laugh, which from Carolyn is a serious endorsement. "Give me 3 days," she said. "I'll look at the structure and tell you what's possible." I gave her 3 days. In the meantime, my phone continued to not be quiet. Deborah called Tuesday evening. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was a remarkable combination of tearful and presumptuous. She talked about how stressful everything was, how the kids were anxious, how Mason had a big science fair project coming up, and it would devastate him to change schools midway through the year. She said the family needed to come together. She said she knew she could count on me. She did not say, "I'm sorry for calling you without warning and expecting $50,000. That part didn't make it into the voicemail. My father called Wednesday. I picked up. "Have you made a decision?" "I'm still working through some things," I said. "The deadline is next week, Rachel." "I understand that." "These are children we're talking about, your niece and nephews." "I know exactly who they are, Dad." A pause. And then, in a voice that carried a very specific kind of disappointment, the kind that's designed to land like a weight, he said, "Sometimes I wonder if your career has made you forget what really matters." I didn't take the bait. I didn't get angry. I just said, "I'll be in touch," and got off the phone. I had learned a long time ago that engaging with that kind of statement was a trap. You couldn't win. If you defended yourself, you sounded defensive. If you stayed quiet, they interpreted it as guilt. The only move was to disengage cleanly and let them sit with their own narrative while you went and did something useful. What I went and did was useful. Carolyn called back on Thursday morning.
"It's doable," she said, without preamble, which is how Caroline always starts conversations when the news is good. "Farrell has been looking for a qualified buyer for about a year. The Westbrook campus property is actually one of the pieces he's most interested in moving. It's low yield for the headaches involved in managing an institutional tenant. The numbers are workable. It'll take structure, you'll need partners, and you'll need to move fast." "How fast?" "If you want to be in a position before the school's next board meeting, which I'm told is about 6 weeks out, you'd need to initiate within the next 2 weeks." I thought about my father. The deadline is 2 weeks. Funny how timing works. "Put together the preliminary paperwork," I told Caroline. "Let's make an offer." I want to take a moment here to explain something honestly, because I think it's important and I think sometimes people skip past it. Buying a real estate holding company is not a snap decision. It's not a power move you make in an afternoon because you're angry. If I had done this purely out of spite, purely out of a desire to hurt my sister's kids, it would have been reckless. It would have been financially irresponsible. It would have contradicted everything I had spent 15 years building. I did not do this purely out of spite. I did this because it was, on its own merits, on its own financial logic, a legitimate investment. The Crane Hill portfolio was undervalued relative to what a properly managed institutional real estate portfolio could yield. Caroline's preliminary analysis confirmed it. My own review of the filings confirmed it. The numbers worked. The fact that it also happened to reframe a very specific family dynamic in a very significant way, that was, as they say, a bonus. I had savings, I had investments I could strategically liquidate without materially impacting my long-term position, and I had professional relationships, people I'd worked with for years, investors who trusted my read on things, who could come in as partners on a deal of this size. I will not walk you through every detail of the financing because that's not the story. But I will tell you that within 11 days of my father's phone call, I was sitting in a conference room in downtown Columbus, across a table from Douglas Farrell's legal representatives, with Caroline to my right and a notepad in front of me that I didn't need because I had the numbers memorized. I wore a gray blazer, I had my coffee. Caroline was wearing the expression she always wears in negotiations, the one that looks like total neutrality but is actually total readiness. The negotiation took most of the day. There were the expected moments, the pushback on valuation, the back and forth on timelines, the points where one side went quiet to signal leverage. I had been in enough of these rooms to know that the person who speaks first when the silence goes too long usually loses a little something. I let the silence go as long as it needed to. By 4 in the afternoon, we had a letter of intent. I signed it. Douglas Farrell's representative signed it. And just like that, in a conference room that smelled like recycled air and lukewarm coffee, I was on the path to becoming the majority owner of Crane Hill Properties, which meant, among other things, that I was on the path to becoming the institutional landlord of Westbrook Academy. Now, here is something I need to say clearly because the internet has a way of flattening complicated things into simple ones, and this story deserves its actual shape. I did not buy that property with the sole intention of removing 3 children from a school. I need you to hear that. I am not a person who uses children as weapons. I am not a person who punishes kids for the decisions of their parents. Mason, Lily, and Connor were not my targets. They were never my targets. What I was targeting was the dynamic, the assumption, the belief, firmly held and without examination by the people who were supposed to love me, that my resources were a communal utility available for consumption whenever someone else ran short. That belief needed to be interrupted. And I had found, quite unexpectedly, a legitimate business investment that would do the interrupting. The full closing of the deal took 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, I was polite to my family. I returned calls, I answered questions with careful non-answers. When my father asked if I had made a decision about the school payment, I said I was still working through my options. I was going to be in touch, just not in the way they were imagining. Now, here is something I need to say clearly because the internet has a way of flattening complicated things into simple ones, and this story deserves its actual shape. I did not buy that property with the sole intention of removing 3 children from a school. I need you to hear that. I am not a person who uses children as weapons. I am not a person who punishes kids for the decisions of their parents. Mason, Lily, and Connor were not my targets. They were never my targets. What I was targeting was the dynamic, the assumption, the belief, firmly held and without examination by the people who were supposed to love me, that my resources were a communal utility available for consumption whenever someone else ran short. That belief needed to be interrupted. And I had found, quite unexpectedly, a legitimate business investment that would do the interrupting. The full closing of the deal took 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, I was polite to my family. I returned calls, I answered questions with careful non-answers. When my father asked if I had made a decision about the school payment, I said I was still working through my options. I was going to be in touch, just not in the way they were imagining.
During those 6 weeks, Troy actually got a job. I want to give that its due credit. He found a new position, lower base salary than his previous role, but with commission structure and genuine upside. He was, by all accounts, working hard at it. That mattered. It mattered to the scholarship review that was coming. But it wasn't going to matter to my father's ask because the tuition deadline was weeks away and the new salary wouldn't cover it. One Sunday during this period, my father said something to me on the phone that I've thought about many times since. He said, "You know, Rachel, when we're gone, when your mother and I are gone, the only thing you're going to have is family. And the way you're behaving, you might not even have that." I was quiet for a moment because that sentence landed somewhere. Not where he intended it to, but it landed. I thought about what it would mean to have family, real family, the kind that sees you and respects you and doesn't treat your life as a resource. I thought about what I was actually protecting and what I was actually willing to give up to protect it. Then I said, Dad, I love you, but I need you to understand something. I have spent 10 years being the person this family turns to. I have given money, time, energy, silently, without conditions, without ever once making anyone feel like they owed me. I have never asked to be acknowledged. I have never asked to be thanked. All I have ever asked for, in return for all of that, is to be treated like a person, not a utility, a person. He said, You're being dramatic. I said, Okay. And I got off the phone. 3 days later, the deal closed. Crane Hill Properties, including the lease on the Westbrook Academy campus, was under majority ownership of a holding entity I controlled. I told no one in my family. Not yet. As the controlling stakeholder of Crane Hill Properties, I had certain rights in relation to the institutions that leased space from the portfolio. I had the right to appoint a representative to the oversight committee that reviewed lease compliance and financial arrangements with institutional tenants. I had the right to participate in or observe governance discussions that affected the long-term tenancy of those institutions. And I had the ability, through appropriate channels, to ensure that the board's own existing processes were followed correctly and thoroughly. I appointed a representative named Patricia Okonkwo. Patricia had spent 15 years in private school administration before moving into consulting. She understood the educational world, the board dynamics, the language, and the expectations of that environment. She was thoughtful, professional, and genuinely good at what she did. I trusted her completely. I also trusted that she would conduct herself with integrity, which meant she wouldn't manipulate anything. She would simply ensure that the processes that were supposed to happen, happened. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening in late November. I drove down from Chicago the day before. I stayed at a hotel downtown, nothing fancy, just quiet, which is what I needed. I had dinner with Caroline that evening. We sat at a corner table and worked through the sequence one more time, not because anything was uncertain, but because Caroline is thorough, and I appreciated that about her. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked at one point. I put down my fork. "Do you mean the acquisition overall, or the specific outcome I'm anticipating?" "The specific outcome." I looked at her. My father told me I had no real responsibilities. My sister expected me to hand over $50,000 without so much as a real conversation. My family has been treating me like an ATM for the better part of a decade. I have given $100,000, quietly and without complaint, and the thank you I got was being left out of a group chat where they planned how to spend my money. I picked my fork back up. "Yes, Caroline, I'm sure." She nodded once and cut into her salmon. That was the end of the conversation. Beat. The board meeting the following evening was, from the outside, unremarkable. 12 people in a conference room with fluorescent lighting and catered coffee. Reports were presented, agenda items were covered, the kind of institutional governance meeting that happens thousands of times a week in buildings across the country. But about 45 minutes in, they reached the item that mattered, the annual Scholarship and Tuition Assistance Review. Every year, Westbrook Academy's Scholarship Committee reviewed its active assistance recipients. The purpose was straightforward, to confirm that the financial circumstances that had originally qualified a family for aid were still current, that the assistance was being utilized as intended, and that households whose situations had materially improved were transitioned appropriately off scholarship funding to make room for families who genuinely needed it. This was not a new policy. This was not something that had been created for this occasion. This was how the program had always worked. Patricia presented the review findings. Among them was a notation about 3 assistance-enrolled students, listed in the documentation as students from the Keller household, whose original aid application had been filed during a period of significant income reduction. Patricia presented the updated financial picture of the Keller household. Troy Keller was now employed. His new salary, combined with Deborah's part-time income, placed the family above the scholarship eligibility threshold. The board discussed it, fairly, thoroughly, professionally, and then they voted. The scholarship assistance for the 3 Keller children was, per the recommendation of the scholarship committee and the affirmative vote of the board, marked for formal discontinuation at the conclusion of the current semester. Per standard procedure, letters would be sent to the family within 10 business days. The letters were sent. I was back in my Chicago apartment when the letters arrived at Deborah's house. I know exactly the day they arrived because that was the day my phone essentially stopped being a phone and became a notification device for incoming distress. Deborah called first, then Troy, then my mother, a woman who had up to this point done the wise thing and largely stayed at the edge of the situation. When I saw her name, I felt something shift in my chest. I answered, "Rachel." Her voice was pulled tight. "What is happening? Deborah got a letter from the school about the scholarship. The children are it says they're losing their tuition assistance." I heard. A beat. "Did you know about this?" "Mom." "Rachel, did you have something to do with this?" I took a steady breath. "Can you put Dad on? I'd like to talk to him." A shuffling sound. A silence that stretched, and then my father picked up, and I could tell, from his first syllable, from the particular quality of his silence before he spoke, that he had already talked to Deborah. He knew something had shifted. He just didn't know what. "Rachel, what did you do?" "I made a financial investment. About 6 weeks ago, I acquired majority ownership of a holding company called Crane Hill Properties." Silence. "I'm sorry, what?" "Crane Hill Properties. They own the building and grounds that Westbrook Academy operates out of. I hold controlling interest. I've held it for about 6 weeks." The silence that followed was so complete that I genuinely looked at my phone to confirm the call was still active. Then my father very quietly said, "You did what?" "I bought the property company, which makes me effectively the institutional landlord of Westbrook Academy, and when the scholarship committee conducted its annual review at last month's board meeting, the updated financial circumstances of Troy and Deborah's household were evaluated. Troy has been employed for several weeks now. Their combined income places them above the eligibility threshold. The board discussed it fairly, thoroughly, professionally, and then they voted. The scholarship assistance for the 3 Keller children was, per the recommendation of the scholarship committee and the affirmative vote of the board, marked for formal discontinuation at the conclusion of the current semester. Per standard procedure, letters would be sent to the family within 10 business days. The letters were sent. I was back in my Chicago apartment when the letters arrived at Deborah's house. I know exactly the day they arrived because that was the day my phone essentially stopped being a phone and became a notification device for incoming distress. Deborah called first, then Troy, then my mother, a woman who had up to this point done the wise thing and largely stayed at the edge of the situation. When I saw her name, I felt something shift in my chest. I answered, "Rachel." Her voice was pulled tight. "What is happening? Deborah got a letter from the school about the scholarship. The children are it says they're losing their tuition assistance." I heard. A beat. "Did you know about this?" "Mom." "Rachel, did you have something to do with this?" I took a steady breath. "Can you put Dad on? I'd like to talk to him." A shuffling sound. A silence that stretched, and then my father picked up, and I could tell, from his first syllable, from the particular quality of his silence before he spoke, that he had already talked to Deborah. He knew something had shifted. He just didn't know what. "Rachel, what did you do?" "I made a financial investment. About 6 weeks ago, I acquired majority ownership of a holding company called Crane Hill Properties." Silence. "I'm sorry, what?" "Crane Hill Properties. They own the building and grounds that Westbrook Academy operates out of. I hold controlling interest. I've held it for about 6 weeks." The silence that followed was so complete that I genuinely looked at my phone to confirm the call was still active. Then my father very quietly said, "You did what?" "I bought the property company, which makes me effectively the institutional landlord of Westbrook Academy, and when the scholarship committee conducted its annual review at last month's board meeting, the updated financial circumstances of Troy and Deborah's household were evaluated.
Troy has been employed for several weeks now. Their combined income places them above the eligibility threshold. The board discussed.
The board voted. The scholarship assistance was discontinued. I let that sit. And then, my father's voice changed entirely. The quiet evaporated, and something else came through the phone, something loud, heated, the sound of a man who had prepared for one conversation and was suddenly in a completely different one. "Rachel!" His voice cracked through the line. "What did you do? Where are those children supposed to go?" I let him go. He called me vindictive. He called me petty. He said I had disgraced the family, that I had used money as a weapon, that I had punished innocent children for something that was not their fault. I let him say all of it. He ran for about 2 minutes straight. When the words finally ran out and there was nothing left but his breathing, heavy, unsteady, I said in a voice that did not waver even slightly, "Public school." Silence. That is where they can go. There are good public schools in their district. I've looked at the ratings. Mason will be fine. Lily will thrive. She's social and creative, and kids like that find their people anywhere. Connor is 7. Connor will be completely fine. "You are unbelievable," my father said. "Dad." I kept my voice level, even, the way you keep water level when you're carrying it a long distance. "You called me and told me I had no real responsibilities. You told me I was obligated, not asked, obligated, to pay for your grandchildren's private school because I chose not to have children of my own. You used my choice about my own life, a personal, private, thoughtful choice that affects no one but me, as a justification to take money from me. You framed my success as a family resource and my different life as a debt. This isn't about, I'm not finished." He went quiet. "You have been doing this for 10 years. The asks, the guilt, the language, family takes care of each other, you don't have real expenses, you make good money, as though the money I make fell out of the sky instead of coming from years of discipline and sacrifice that you watched and never once asked about. I have given this family $100,000 over the last decade, not loans, gifts, money I earned and gave freely and never once brought up. And the response to that, the thank you for a decade of generosity, was being excluded from the conversation where you plan to take more." "We didn't plan, Dad." My voice just slightly dropped. "I know there was a group chat. I know the decision was made before you called me. I know I was not invited to participate in the conversation about my own money." Silence. "I didn't do this for revenge. I made a sound business investment. The scholarship review was a standard board process that happens every year, applied consistently to every recipient. I did not call the school. I did not instruct anyone to target the Keller family. The process worked the way it was designed to work." "You knew exactly what you were doing," he said, quieter now. "Yes," I said. "I did." Quiet. This is the center of the whole story. I've been saying yes to this family for 10 years. I gave money I worked for. Nights and weekends, missed vacations, years of careful, disciplined choices. Because I love this family. Because I believed love meant showing up. But somewhere in that decade, my showing up became your expectation. My generosity became your budget. And my choice to live differently from you became, apparently, a reason to treat me like I owe you something. My voice did not break. "I don't owe you this, Dad. I never did. And the sooner we can both understand that, the sooner we can actually be a family again. A real one. one where I am a person, not a resource. A long silence, the longest one yet. And then my father, in a voice I had genuinely never heard from him before, quieter, smaller, like something had gone out of it, said, "I don't understand you, Rachel." I nodded. He couldn't see it, but I nodded. "I know," I said, softly. "I know you don't, but I hope someday you will." And I said goodbye. The weeks after that phone call were strange. Not bad strange, not good strange, just strange. The air after a storm quality that follows a thing that needed to happen and finally did. My mother called me 2 days later, on her own, without my father. She didn't call to defend him or to pile on me. She called because she's my mother, and she was worried. And underneath the worry was something else. Something that she said haltingly, like she wasn't sure she had the right to say it. She said, "I've watched you give for a long time, Rachel, and I've watched this family receive, and I didn't do enough to make it balanced. I'm sorry for that." I sat with that for a moment. "Mom, you don't have to." "I do," she said. "I want to say it. You deserved better than what we asked of you." I cried after that call. Just a little, but genuinely. Deborah and I did not speak for 3 months. When she finally called, a rainy Saturday in February, a day I remember because I had been making soup and the apartment smelled warm, she didn't call to fight. She called to cry. And I let her. I listened to everything. The humiliation of telling the kids they were changing schools. The grief of watching Mason pack up his locker. The guilt she'd been carrying. Not just about the school, but about everything. About years of taking without really seeing. And then she said the thing that surprised me. "I didn't realize how much we'd been leaning on you until you weren't there to lean on. And then I started thinking about everything you'd ever given us. And I realized I never actually asked you. I just expected. And I don't know when I became that person. But I became her. And I'm sorry." I sat with it. "I'm still here, Deb. I just needed you to actually see me." She cried harder. I cried too. A little. We're allowed.
We are not fully repaired. I will not paint you a tidy picture of reconciliation and Sunday dinners and everything back to normal. It doesn't work that way. Family fractures are not healed by a single conversation. They heal over time through accumulated small acts of a different kind of seeing. We're in the middle of that. It's slow, it's real. My father and I had a longer, calmer conversation in March. He did not apologize directly. He isn't built for direct apology, and I've accepted that about him. But he asked me about my work. He asked about the Crane Hill portfolio. He asked about my plants. And at the end of the call, unprompted, he said, "You've always known how to take care of yourself. I see that now." Coming from Gerald Simmons, a man who once called me dramatic for asking to be treated like a person, that sentence was practically a standing ovation. I said, "I learned from watching you, Dad." He was quiet for a moment, and then he laughed. A real laugh. A little tired, a little complicated, but real. We're still working on it. Mason, Lily, and Connor are at Lincoln Park Elementary now, and by all accounts, they are completely fine. Mason made the math team within his first month. Lily has a best friend named Jasmine, who she talks about so constantly that even I know Jasmine's opinions on things. Connor still loves video games, still can't be bothered to form opinions about where he goes to school, and recently won a spelling bee, which delighted everyone. Children are resilient. I always believed that. Life proved it. As for Crane Hill Properties, I want to be honest with you about this. It is performing well.
better than projected in the first year. The Westbrook relationship is professional and uncomplicated. I am not a villain to the institution, I'm a landlord, a fair one. And I have no regrets. Not about the acquisition, not about the board meeting, not about the phone call. Because here is the truth that I keep coming back to, the thing that matters more than the strategy, more than the property, more than any of the details. I didn't win because I bought a building. I won because I finally, fully, without apology, without explanation, without asking anyone's permission, I chose myself. For 10 years, I had been sending this family a message: my needs can wait. My money is available. My different life is a deficit. And they had received that message and acted on it accordingly. The day I stopped sending it, everything changed. Not just for them, for me. And it is very, very hard to put a dollar value on that. So here is what I want to leave you with. If you are the person in your family who always shows up, who always writes the check, always answers the call, always smooths things over, always absorbs the cost of other people's choices, I see you. And I need you to hear something clearly. Your success is yours. The life you built, the discipline, the sacrifice, the choices you made at 2 a.m. when nobody was watching and nobody would have known if you'd quit, that belongs to you. Nobody gets to subtract from it just because they need it and you happen to have it. Helping people you love is one of the most beautiful things in the world. It is a genuine expression of love, and I believe that. But helping that is demanded is not love. Giving that is extracted is not generosity. And the difference between a gift and a tax is whether you had a choice. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to draw a line and hold it. You are allowed to love your family completely and still not let them live off the infrastructure of your life. And sometimes the most important thing you can do for the people who have been taking you for granted is to let them discover what life looks like without the safety net they didn't even know they were standing on. Not as punishment, not as revenge, as truth, as the thing that finally makes them see you. My name is Rachel Simmons. I built a life, I protected it, I made a sound investment, and I finally got to drink my Sunday morning coffee while it was still hot. It tasted amazing. It still does. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel less alone in something you've been carrying quietly, please share it right now with someone who needs to hear it. Post it, text it, send it to your group chat. This kind of story needs to travel. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do that right now. New stories every week. We don't do surface level here. We go deep, we go real, and we always go all the way. I'll see you in the next one.